In Module 3, we're going to go into more explicitly the infant and child memories. Now that we've done the review in Module 1 over the information processing, and in Module 2 talking about various types of memory, now we're going to look at how those change over time. And so this module, we're going to start with infants. And so in infants, what we know is that the fetus is capable of learning with both short and long-term memory. And we know this through experiments like infants having a preference for music that they've heard in the womb that they've been exposed to, or more explicitly, that they tend to turn towards and pay more attention to their mother's voice and learn their mother's voice much quicker. And that is probably due to in utero kind of learning, though it's not at anywhere the speed that we commonly associate with it. So some things that infants are able to do pretty early on is engage in something called imitation and also habituation. Okay, imitation and habituation. So let's talk about each one here. So imitation first, and what that is simply doing what the other person is doing. And so that's what our pictures on the right-hand side are. That gentleman from, it looks like probably the 1970s. And the first thing he's doing is he's sticking out his tongue, and you can see the baby then mimics that. Now, when you do this, and with anything with infants, if you want them to respond, you got to do it for a long time so that they actually will repeat it. They don't process information really fast. So when you stick out your tongue, it probably gets to the point where you begin to kind of salivate a little bit. So you're just like, and then you finally do it. Funny little story. My daughter, when I tried to do that with her as a newborn, she wouldn't stick out her tongue, and I was a little bit frustrated, of course, being understanding. But what we found out is she was tongue-tied, which means that she couldn't stick her tongue out further. And so we had to do something about that. But the open mouth did work, where you just, and then the baby will do it too. It's really cool. It's really cool. And so that's imitation. And deferred imitation is being able to not have to see the model that you're imitating right in front of you to imitate it. So if you stick out your tongue later, that may show deferred imitation of behaviors that the infant saw early on. But that's going to be one of your first rudimentary kind of signs that you have some memory. The other one is habituation, and we've talked a little bit about that, I believe. And the habituation is basically learning to be bored. In other words, you get repeatedly exposed to the same stimuli, and after a while, you begin to learn to ignore that stimuli so that you look for new stuff. And this is one of the ways when we do testing, we try to measure infants' recognition memory by using this habituation, because they can't tell us. They lack words and have no ability to really speak. And so one thing you can do is you can ring a little bell on one side of their head, and you can see if they kind of turn their head towards that sound. And then you can repeat it again, see if they turn, you repeat it again. If they ignore, they obviously have not gotten deaf in that repeat, in between those two, but rather they have learned to habituate to it, and they already know what it is, and they're like, okay, been there, done that. And so that's recognition memory that you see at birth, very, very early on. You also can see that the infants are able to engage in operant conditioning. So in operant conditioning, remember, are just reinforcers and punishers. So reinforcers it's more likely somebody will do something again, and punishers are to reduce the likelihood. So what you can see is that newborns are capable of recognition memory right away, but things like cued recall take a little bit longer. And basically, infants have to be reminded of what they've learned. And so to be reminded, they're very context specific. So if you want them to remember that it's feeding time or something, if you use the same chair in the same room with the same type of lighting with the mother, all of that is going to allow them to go, oh, okay, now I know I'm going to be getting fed. So then they can prepare to be fed. But as you can see, there's a lot of things that have to be in place for them to kind of remember that they can do what it is. So young infants do have a lot of difficulty recalling what they have learned if those cues are not sufficient. So let's say it's feeding time, but you're in a different room and it's a different setting altogether. They may not quite be as prepared to eat as they would have in the room that they're used to. Okay? So right around 9 months of age, you begin to see pure recall, once again, just primitive amount. You also begin to see explicit memory, where you consciously are trying to make memories occur right around, the end of the first year, so about 12 months. And then by age 2, what you begin to see is that infants have become more verbal, and we'll talk about that in a future chapter. And they can use words to then reconstruct the events that have happened even months earlier, and that can start at age 2. There's a lot of issues with them in their describing their memories, in that a lot of times they don't know to provide any context for what that memory is, and you don't know if that happened 5 minutes ago or 5 months ago. And so they still have a lot of practice in making sure that they understand that other people don't know exactly what they're talking about, that they have to frame it in some ways. But it is a true kind of marching advancement for these kids as they get more and more advanced and develop. Okay? So that's infancy and some of the memory developments that we see there, starting off with that very first recognition, going to cued recall, and then finally pure recall memory. As far as children, what we know is that older children tend to learn faster and they remember more than younger children. And there's 4 major hypotheses that kind of try to explain why this is. And the first one is that there is just a change in the basic capabilities. Your neurons are able to travel faster because you have more maturation. There is more myelin sheath going around those neurons, which allows the electricity to go through quicker. You just have more basic capacities. Your short-term memory can handle more chunks of information than it could before. So that in itself is going to account for some of the changes between, say, young children and older children. There's going to be a change in the memory strategies that are utilized. And so we're going to get into more of the memory strategies in the next module, but you're going to get better at things like rehearsal, where you repeat something over and over again to kind of get it lodged into your head. The third one is just increased knowledge about how memory works. The fact that you have certain strategies that you need to use in certain situations to help remember things. So, for example, if I just have to quickly memorize a phone number, I know I could just do it on my phone. But let's say my phone somehow, oh my goodness, is not with me and I have to memorize it. I can just use kind of brute force rehearsal, and that works. But let's say I have an exam coming up and they want me to memorize a list of 7 things. I know I can use elaboration, which we'll be talking about, which means putting in like acronyms to stand for the list to help cue recall my memory. Okay, so as they become older, they become more proficient in that. And then finally is you've just been around in the world for longer periods of time. So this increased knowledge of the world really does give you an extra advantage. It allows you to have more chunks of information. It allows you to provide context for the new information you have coming in. And the more context you have, the easier it is to fit in and make connections to things, and thus make it easier to remember than something that is totally brand new and unknown. And when you're a young child, that's going to be most things because you just haven't been around long enough to learn a lot of it. Okay. So all of this is going on, and what that's going to lead is to more advanced understandings and eventually getting into the Piagetian formal operational thought, where you're using all of this information into an advanced type of problem solving. And so what we're going to talk about in Module 4 is look at what children use as far as those memory strategies that I was talking about on that second hypothesis there, and going into a lot more detail. So stay tuned for Module 4.